Welcome to the show. This is the Patrick Coffin Show. I am Patrick Coffin, and I'm so looking forward to this conversation with someone I met about 30 years ago in Hollywood circles, and it's just such a great putting a bow on so many years of productivity, at least on her end. This is the kind of topic that there'll be some censorship by big tech. So if you want to hear the full, unfiltered, uncensored version of this conversation, go directly to my website. That's patrickcoffin.media, patrickcoffin.media. I want to thank Mike Lindell, whom I've interviewed 3 times. Mike has helped me sleep. Mike's products at MyPillow have got me through a lot of stressful times. Sleep is so important. The rest and restore mode of human life is just so crucial to being productive and happy and peaceful and an intentional disciple. So go to mypillow.com. It's not just pillows. He has travel pillows. He has Giza cotton sheets and towels and doggy beds and slippers. In fact, I did not rehearse this. I wear these MyPillow slippers constantly. My name, Patrick, Patrick, at the checkout gets you a 66% discount for Patrick Coffin listeners. So go to mypillow.com. Thanks, Mike, for supporting the show and for getting this episode out into at least the Audible universe. Okay, growing up, I had a couple of favorite TV shows. One of them was Homicide: Life in the Street, and the other one, which kind of looms larger in my memory, is Hill Street Blues. So when I finally got to meet the writer of Hill Street Blues, Karen Hall, in Hollywood, my gosh, it was the previous millennium. I interviewed her for a magazine now defunct called New Covenant. It was called Hall in a Day's Work. And that was the beginning of a lot of fertile conversations, and we don't speak nearly enough. But Karen Hall has written a book called The Sound of Silence: The Life and Canceling of a Heroic Jesuit Priest, a priest I never met, Father Paul Mankowski, the late great Father Paul Mankowski. Karen, thank you so much for writing this book, and I'm glad to hang out with you and talk about it.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
Now, you're normally writing in a mode of camera directions and the very spare format for TV scripts and feature film scripts. Was it a totally different change up for you to go more free flow prose and tell the story of your friend Father Paul?
Yeah, writing nonfiction is something I don't think I've ever done. I've written a couple of, concert reviews and things like that, but I've never written anything like this. I was lucky because I have a good friend who moved here recently, John Francis Clark, who writes for the Register and National Catholic Register. And he has written a lot of nonfiction books. And he was trying to write a novel. So we decided that you know, we would trade off. So we had a lot of breakfasts where I gave him notes on his novel and he gave me notes on my nonfiction. Um, and spent a lot of time telling me how to write it. But I discovered that I really like it a lot. So I'd like to do it again.
Do you feel like the guardrails disappear and you can free range with your wordsmithery?
Um, I always like being my own boss, so that's what I like about it the most. So the happiest I was in show business was when I was running a show because I didn't have to read someone else's mind. So I liked, being able to do what I wanted to do instead of somebody telling me how to do it. So
My viewers might remember M.A.S.H, of course. I remember watching the final episode of M.A.S.H when I was a Ute and never dreamed that I would get to know the writer of that episode. How did you start at M.A.S.H? Did I hear you say years ago in one of our conversations that Alan Alda was kind of a mentor? Did he kind of bring you in as the first female
yes.
staff writer? Yeah.
He did, and I had met him in 1977. I was in college. I took a summer program through the University of Richmond, and the professors were kind of they wrote about TV, as sociologists, and they had a lot of connections from having written their books. And so one of their connections was Alan Alda. So the group of us got to go to the M.A.S.H set and sit and listen to him talk. And I mentioned to him that I had a 1-act play that was being produced in my community theater back at home in my small town, and that I was missing it so that I could come there and listen to him talk. And so we started talking about my writing, and he told me that when I got home to send him the play. And so I did, and he called me at my sorority house. I know
Yeah.
my
I
my
gotta go.
sorority.
Alan Alda. I gotta go. I'll be right back.
No, I was not there, and so
Oh,
one of my friends answered the phone, and and he told her who it was, and she said to him, "Yeah, and I'm Bob Redford. Nice to meet you." So she was really embarrassed when she found out that
yeah.
actually was Alan Alda.
Hmm.
But we kept in touch. That was, my senior year in college. We kept in touch. I sent him everything I wrote, and he would write back and compliment me. And then he finally said that he had talked to his agent, and he said, you really have to live out here to be able to make it. And so, that was what made me bite the bullet and move to California.
Hmm.
And when I first got out there, I sat down with him, and he said, "Now you better be ready for 5 years of typing and filing." And that was a horror story to me. So I said, "I can't do 5 years of typing and filing." And he said, "Well, that's what it usually takes." But within 11 months, he called me and said that um, M.A.S.H wanted to hire a new staff writer, and he wanted them to hire a woman because they'd never had a female staff writer. And so I went in and interviewed for the job, and I got it. So
So they obviously the first calling card was the quality of your writing, but I never thought about an interview gets you a writing job since it's words on paper.
well, they had read my spec script, so they knew I could write. But a lot of what the interview is when you go on a staff is, do we want to be in the room with this person all day long? And I think that's at least 50% of it. I
Mhm.
know that when I've hired people, it's like, is this person going to drive me crazy? Because I can rewrite the script, but if she's making everybody nuts, then that's not going to be good. So
Did you always have this natural born gift for storytelling? Is this something that started pre age 10, or was it a
yeah,
college
yes.
avocation?
I knew when I was 6 years old that I was going to be a writer, and that's what I was put here to do. Um, I wrote my first story in the first grade. The teacher told us to, get out our yellow paper and write a story. And I said, how do I do that? And she said, write 3 sentences and make something happen. And that was some of the best advice anyone ever gave me, because I read a whole lot of scripts where people are not making something happen. And I did that, and I just thought, this is the most magical thing in the world. I can make up anything, I can do anything I want to do. And so I decided then, she was reading Charlotte's Web to us. And so I connected, I think she talked to us about the author. So I figured out this is a job you can have when you grow up. And so I decided that that's what I wanted to do.
One last question about Hollywood. I could go 9 more hours because I just find the process of coming up with an idea to having it germinate, and then all of a sudden someone you grew up watching on television are saying the words that you wrote.
Yeah.
Did that happen with Hill Street Blues? Did you have the first light bulb, like my stuff's on television and
Well,
actor X is saying thoughts that I created?
yeah, the first time that happened was my first job was a spec M.A.S.H script, a freelance M.A.S.H script. And so, yes, when I sat down and watched my words coming out of Alan Alda's mouth, that was pretty heady. And the same thing with Hill Street, because I loved Hill Street. I was watching it while I was on staff at M.A.S.H. And I called over one day I wanted to get a copy of the script so that I could see what it looked like. I wanted to try to write a spec script. And Stephen Bochco called me and said, well, first of all, professional writers are not supposed to write spec scripts, which I wish that were still a thing. But at the time, we weren't allowed to. And I said, well, I just want you to know that if all your writers get hit by a bus, I would love to come write for you. And so he said, well, why don't you do it before they get hit by a bus? So I went over and talked to him, and they hired me to do a freelance episode. And they really liked that. In fact, it got nominated for an Emmy. So I was very proud of that episode. And then they hired me to be on staff. And I was the first woman on staff there, too. They had other
Hmm.
women after I left.
And that's a Chatham, Virginia accent we hear, right?
Yes, it is. And what it
Uh,
is, my hometown is right on the border of Virginia and North Carolina. So,
mhm.
and I also lived in North Carolina for a long time. So it's a mush together Virginia North Carolina accent.
You grew up in Protestant circles, I wanted to talk about how you ended up crossing the Tiber, because there's so much to say about Mahoney Catholicism that you kind of the shadow of Mahoney Catholicism is part of your story in telling the story of Father Paul Mankowski. How did you get to becoming a Catholic? What's the compressed version?
You know, it's a compressed version, but I have to start with something that I think was supernatural, which was when I was around 8 years old. I'd be sitting at church, and a voice in my head said, "Something is wrong." And that went on, and I was like, "What's wrong? I don't know what's wrong." And so I told my parents, I said, "I don't think I'm in the right church." So we lived on Main Street across from all the other churches. So they let me, when we crossed the street, I could go to any church I wanted to. So I went to the Baptist church and the Episcopalian church and the Presbyterian church. And I came back and said, "Whatever's wrong is wrong in all of those." Um, but I couldn't find what was right, and I didn't even know what was wrong, so I kind of forgot about it. And um, my senior year in high school, I started dating my who's now my husband, and he was Catholic. And in Chatham, Virginia, there were no Catholics, and there was no Catholic church. So he went to a military school in town, and his mother um, had made a deal with the school that they would, put him and the Hispanic kids on the bus to go to mass every Sunday. Um, so when I met him, and one day I went with him to mass, and I just walked in the church, and I just could have screamed, "This is what I'm talking about," because I thought my experience of God has got to be something other than sitting on a hard bench listening to somebody lecture me for 45 minutes. And I also thought they had to be something tangible. So when he explained transubstantiation to me, I was like, bingo, that's what's wrong. Um, and, it was miraculous and incredible. I didn't join the church then because my Protestant parents would not have been happy about it. So I went off to college, and I kept going to mass. I went to the guitar mass with the young priest, and in blue jeans and the whole deal, which at college age suited me just fine. Although when I had gone to mass with my husband, it was the beauty of the liturgy that I had fallen in love with. Um, when I was a senior in college, my best Catholic friend told the pastor there that I wanted to join the church. And we had been going to folk mass with the young pastor who was hip and cool. And the actual pastor was, as I said in the book, about 137 years old and had lost his enthusiasm for New Catholics. And so, uh, we sat down to talk, and he gave me some stuff to read and said, "Come back in a week." And I handed him my 2 pages, single spaced questions for him. And he unfolded it and looked at it. And he looked at me and he said, "Read what I gave you and come back in a week." So because I was, in college and I knew everything, I just stormed off in a huff and stayed gone for 15 years. So I ended up coming back when I was writing my novel Dark Deaths. It had a priest for a protagonist, and I hadn't been to church in 15 years. So I decided I'd better go back and, to do research, because I couldn't even remember why anybody would believe, this, what was by then to me insanity, because I'd been living in Hollywood and getting a lot of support for not believing anything. And I ended up going back and with no idea that I would join the church, but it took about 4 Sundays that I describe in the book before I went, okay, this is where I belong. And so then I took RCIA classes and joined the church.
Of course, joining the church in the 90s in Los Angeles meant a kind of beige, watered down, weaponized ambiguity kind of Catholicism, which normally comes, even after you join the church, it comes with a kind of further development. And maybe the priest protagonist in Dark Debts is a symbol of the growth that you experienced, and how the subject of your fine book, The Sound of Silence, Father Paul Mankowski, offered a kind of narrative corrective to that story and what was at stake, and the vision of the priesthood that you started with in the first iteration of the book, which I guess almost became a movie, correct? So David Brown
You know
component
what?
there?
Even today, I am making a pitch deck for it to become a television series. So
Okay, great.
it's the thing that won't die. But yes.
Hmm. And Dark Debts is about evil spirits and Kind of
It's about
generational curse.
yeah, it's about a family that has a demonic curse on it, generational curse. And I got the idea because I had a friend whose mother believed that his family had a demonic curse on it. And I knew all the circumstances of his family, and I thought that she had a really good case for that. So I thought I would like to try to write. And I'd always been obsessed with that too, because I read and loved The Exorcist when I was in high school. And so I thought, I've been waiting for somebody else to write another book like that, and nobody really had. So I decided I'd write one. Um, and so, that gave me a really good structure for the novel. I remember my sister, who's also a writer and producer, when I was talking about writing the novel, she said, "If you don't write it, I'm going to write it. So you'd better write it."
Mm-hmm.
So I did.
Game on. I had an email friendship with Billy Pete, William Peter Blatty, uh, another friendship I never thought would exist.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm still friends with his wife, so
oh, great,
carries
great.
on. Yes.
Hmm. Um, I remember the first time I read a line from Father Paul Mankowski. It was a book edited by Helen Hall Hitchcock. I still have it on my shelf. It's called The Politics of Prayer. And that one essay by Father Mankowski, I saw S.J. after his name, and I knew this was not your typical Jebby with
Yes.
denim and clown masses. This was a scholarly approach to so-called inclusive language. And he, with so much aplomb and ease, but really, I knew there was like a sledgehammer mind behind his words, and that's when I began to look for everything that he wrote. I didn't know he was Diogenes in Catholic World Report.
Oh, you didn't?
Well, no, I not for a while. I knew I was friendly with Phil Lawler, but I never thought to ask him. How did you first encounter Father Paul? Was it through his writing, or was it a talk he gave, a conference?
No, it wasn't. It was from a talk he gave,
Hmm.
but I talk about in my book about how, when I joined the church and I was really a Mahoneyite Catholic, I had no idea of that because I didn't know there was more than one Catholic church. And what I assumed was that things had really, God had lightened up since I last left the Catholic Church. And so, my mother-in-law, who did realize what the divide was, really didn't. I don't think she considered me Catholic even after I joined the church. So she wanted Father Paul to straighten me out, and she belonged to the Fellowship of Catholic Scholars, and he was coming there to give a talk, and so she sent me in her place. And when I was getting ready to leave, she said, "Do not get on the plane to come home unless you have introduced yourself to Father Mankowski." And I was afraid of her, so I did. Um, but we met kind of across a crowded room because I was at the conference and he was one of the speakers and was listening to a panel. And I I had just started to realize that the wheels were off the bus because Cardinal Mahoney had just put out his famous pastoral letter, "Gather Faithfully Together." Um, I always call it "gather faithlessly together," and I knew that thing was wrong. And then it was starting to spread to. I was living in Orlando at the time, and it was starting to spread to there. And so I asked the panel, "What are we going to do about this?" I've since figured out that scholars don't want to roll up their sleeves and do anything about anything. They just want to. And I said to Paul, they just want to read papers to each other, and then tell each other how good the papers were. And he said, a scholar said, that's pretty much right. But I just kept asking, what do we do? And at the panel, they all looked at each other, like, I'm not going to try it. Are you going to try it? And then they all leaned over and looked at Paul like, let's get Mikey to try it. Because it was like he was the only one who might answer that question. So he did, and he gave me really good advice. But we kind of knew, talking across this crowded room, that we were uh, foxhole buddies. And so when I went and introduced myself to him, it was like we already knew a lot about each other. And about 2 days after the conference ended, I got an email from him, and he was talking about something I had said. And then we were just kind of off to the races. It wasn't really a friendship that built over the years. It was just,
Hmm.
you're on my side, let's go.
Got
So
you.
that's how it was.
I remember the first time I met you was at an open call night in, I want to say Westwood. I was working for the late Father Bud Kaiser and my dear friend Barbara Nicolosi,
Oh
and
yes,
you were the speaker that night, and I still remember it was uncharacteristically overcast, cold, and rainy, and one of the first things you said was that Christianity is offensive, and it was that's the way you put it. I knew exactly what you meant, and it was like lightning in a bottle. So I felt like there was a kindred spirit
yep,
because people they don't take the Christian claim very seriously. This
no,
kind of Jesus was nice. There's a Fred Rogers, Barney feel to a lot of post-Vatican II Catholicism. But
yes.
if you examine the origins of the claims, it's offensive. Christ is God.
It's offensive, and
Sex is for marriage.
it was radical. And I love the Old Testament, and I've been reading that over recently, and it was always radical. It was always not how people were living and how they were thinking. And so now, the more we water it down to get along with the world, it's like that's just wrong. Um, and I get upset when I read things that the Pope has said about how the church has to basically get with the world. And I think, did you not read that verse about friendship with the world is enmity with God? We're not here to get along with the world. We're here to show the world how they're supposed to be living, not, figure out how we can live like them.
Yeah. There's parallels, I think, between Roger Mahoney, just for people who don't realize, to this day, as we are having this conversation, the de facto head of the Catholic Church in Los Angeles is Roger Mahoney, the retired Cardinal Archbishop. And his corrupt shadow looms large over all kinds of decisions in the LA Catholic context. And this is a good segue to what happened to the Jesuit order starting from the, I would say, mid 60s, when things started to go sideways and then south. There's
Yes.
a book by Father Becker, which is a kind of a history. Malachi Martin has a book called The Jesuits that describes their decline. And it reminds me, Karen, of the Latin phrase in English. It's the corruption of the best is the worst. You think
Yes.
about the amazing track record of producing sanctity and heroic missionaries and scholarship after the inspiration of the founder, St. Ignatius of Loyola, and now it's just a gay disco. Is that overstatement?
I usually say a gay bathhouse, but yes, it's,
Okay.
you know, and I've said this, I think I said it in the book. I don't know the ratio of good faithful Jesuits to, um, you know, disco Jesuits, but the powers that be are all disco Jesuits. And I asked my Jesuit friends when I was writing the book, how what percentage of the the people with power are modernist disco Jesuits, and the lowest number somebody gave me was 90%, and several of them gave me 100%. And if you look at what goes on, I mean, the face of the Jesuits is Father James Martin. That's really all you need to know. So, the face of the Jesuits is not Father Fessio. Um,
Yeah.
it's James Martin.
And his greatest cheerleader, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, another
Oh yeah.
Jesuit. Did you and Father Paul Mankowski ever talk about the strangeness or the canonical ambiguity of a Jesuit taking an oath to the Pope? But if the Jesuit's the Pope, is he obeying himself?
Well, a Jesuit was never supposed to have become the Pope. Um, St. Ignatius was against Jesuits having any kind of, ecclesial hierarchy stuff. Um, but, that didn't keep the current Pope from being a Pope. So, yeah, we talked about that, but that was kind of a given at the beginning. It's like, okay, for starters, this guy shouldn't be doing this. But we talked a lot about it as the years went on and things got worse. So we we talked about it a lot, and the arc of that conversation went from it has to get better to at the end, Paul sent me several emails that ended with I'm waiting for the asteroid. because, and I would say to him, "You told me that lightning would strike this guy before what's happening is happening," and and he really was like, I got nothing at this point. You know, I don't know where we are."
Am I remembering Good Jesuit, Bad Jesuit? Did you run a blog by that name?
I didn't. A friend of
Someone
mine
else?
did,
Okay.
and I had a blog called "Some Have Hats," where I talked a lot about good Jesuits and bad Jesuits. I ended up deleting it entirely because the comments I got from Jesuits, who are, you know, priests or on their way to being priests, were so vicious that I just wanted them gone from the planet. Uh,
Vicious? Catty too? No.
Vicious, really not even catty, because catty would have implied some fun, but no. Um, it's funny because I got a review of my book on Goodreads from a former Jesuit that reminded me of those comments. Just, just unnecessarily going for the jugular. So I wished I'd kept it because when I got ready to write the book, I thought I wish I had all those comments. I think I'd found one somewhere, but I just wanted it gone. So it's gone. But I knew the guy from Good Jesuits, Bad Jesuits because my blog had a lot of traffic, especially among angry Jesuits who didn't like what I was writing, and so I was Catholic famous for 5 minutes back then.
Angry Jesuits is almost a tautology.
Yeah,
Um, Father Mankowski was drawn to the Jesuits strongly and unremittingly. He never found home anywhere else, correct? Despite the
correct.
constant thumb on his head, the constant pulling of his plug, and so on. Um, it's kind of remarkable to me that he never wanted to be anything other than a Jesuit, but was so mistreated. Is it? Would you say almost from the get go, from final vows, all the passive
Final
aggressive
vows
games,
came way late.
way late? Hmm.
Um, he when he told me that he knew when he knew he had a vocation that it was specifically a vocation to join the Jesuits. Um, his father had had a brief fling with the Jesuits. I don't know the exact details of it, but he didn't stay long because he said he couldn't do the obedience thing. And I think that if Paul hadn't felt so strongly that God wanted him to be a Jesuit, he would have had trouble with the obedience thing too. Um, but he felt like that was where God wanted him, so that's where he went, and he wasn't going to leave because he took things very seriously, like vows. And he said he had vowed to God that he was going to live and die as a Jesuit, so that's what he was going to do. So it didn't matter how badly they treated him. And it took them a long time to figure out because what he told me and what a lot of other Jesuits have told me is that they don't kick you out; they try to make you so miserable that you leave.
How did Father Mankowski die?
He had a brain aneurysm, um, and he had very bad migraines that we all knew about. And when we went over to his room, um, I went with a couple of Jesuit friends of his. And in the trash can, there were two different boxes from whatever you take for a migraine. So we knew that he had a really bad migraine the night before. And he had a dentist appointment. So he went to the dentist, and the way people tell it, he told the dentist he didn't feel well. So he wanted to go ahead and lie down in the chair. And when they went in to work on his teeth, he was non responsive. And so they kept him hooked up to life support until all the family members could get there. But for me, it was just, boom. Um, I actually had got a call from Barbara Nicolosi, our mutual friend, and we call all the time. So I just thought, Barb's calling to chat, and I picked up the phone and said hello, and she said, "Have you heard about Father Mankowski?" And by the time she finished the sentence, I knew. I did a lot of praying while he was hooked up to life support, but I knew. So that's how it happened.
If you want samples from the writing of a Jesuit who is modern in the sense of he talked about current events, but has the refulgence of the Jesuits of the old school. There's so many different eras of his writing included in your book, different genres and different topics. Karen, thanks for putting all the pen to paper, and kudos to our good friends at Crisis for publishing this book. I'm sure people smiled at it and they thought, no thanks, it's too hot.
Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, that's another story. But yes, it's because of Sophia Press that it became real. Another publisher had initially bought it and kind of chickened out of publishing it, so I took it to them. My friend Raymond Arroyo talked me into taking it to them because I was just going to give up. And so they were very brave to publish it. I'm really grateful to them. And you can get the book at sophiainstitute.com if you want to support them for having the courage to publish this book.
Mm-hmm. I'm also going to put a link at patrickcoffin.media in the show notes to this conversation. I like the copy in the back of the book, The Sound of Truth in a Cancel Culture. Terrific book. So glad you wrote it. So glad to catch up with you again, Karen. I love the book, and we should do this more often.
Thank you. Yes, let's do.
Okay, the book is called The Sound of Silence, The Life and Canceling of a Heroic Jesuit Priest, Father Paul Mankowski. His active, unsilenced, uncensored stenographer, loyal reporter Karen Hall has been my guest. Thanks a lot, Karen. Godspeed.
Thank you, Patrick.
This is the Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there?